My name is Lara Baker, and I'm here to give an angel talk on vaping and marijuana. I am a trial lawyer in Denver. I have a big criminal defense practice, which includes everything from murder cases to traffic cases and everything in between. One of the primary focuses of my practice has been juvenile defense and sexual assault cases. And I started giving this presentation more than a decade ago because I was finding in my criminal trial practice that I had way too many really good kids that were in need of my help. Because the laws and the society that these kids are growing up in is so different than the one our generation of parents grew up in, that parents really needed the education as much as kids. So this piece of the presentation, I'm going to focus on vaping and juuling and marijuana. I wanted to say that I understand that this is being recorded, and I just wanted to say that this presentation and some of the things I talk about are generalized. They're not meant to be legal advice, and certainly if you have questions, you should contact a lawyer. Okay, so let me get started. How many of you in this room, I presume because you're here, you've heard of vaping? By a show of hands, everybody heard of vaping. Okay, I'm seeing maybe a few that haven't. How about the term Juul? Everybody familiar with Juuls? Okay, good. So I'm speaking to an audience that knows something about this. Parents are just starting to become aware of it. So let's start at the beginning. What is vaping? Vaping is the use of an electronic cigarette and the inhaling of like vaporized liquid through an electronic device. It can be done with nicotine, it can be done with marijuana, and part of what we're seeing at some of these schools is that the issue is not necessarily the e-cigarette, but it's the Juul that kids are using to smoke marijuana that people presume is being used to smoke nicotine, and kids have figured out how to smoke marijuana with it. So how do you do it? It's just like a smokeless pen, and I'm going to talk to you about, as Bernie introduced this, she talked about what does it look like. If I pull out my flash drive, I won't have my notes, but it looks almost exactly like a flash drive. And so parents sometimes don't know what it is. How prevalent is it? I am starting to hear a lot more about it in my criminal defense practice, and as I was getting ready for today, I was looking at some of the statistics. CNN had a report that came out last week, and they were talking about 1 in 11 kids in middle school and high school are now smoking e-cigarettes, and they're using it to smoke marijuana. There has been a 900% increase in e-cigarette use by high school students since 2015. So what's the problem with it? Let's talk about the law and how does the law address e-cigarettes and vaping, and then we'll get to how does the law address marijuana. E-cigarettes are considered to be a tobacco product. So what does that mean? If your kid is caught with an e-cigarette, presuming no marijuana, the law will, and law enforcement could charge you with what's called a petty offense. So a very brief primer on the law. We talk about felony offenses being the biggest offenses that we have in the criminal justice system, misdemeanor being sort of the mid-tier. A petty offense is really sort of the lowest level of offense you can be charged with. So oftentimes kids think, well, it's no big deal, right? It's just, it doesn't matter because it's just a petty offense, and if I have to go to court for this, I'm going to get, some fine and a slap on the wrist, and it's not really that big a deal. The problem is that schools can treat it very differently. When kids get in trouble with the law, they also oftentimes are subject to the disciplinary process at schools. And many schools, and East is in the Denver public schools, it's slightly different, but many schools have a no tolerance drug policy, which means even if you're caught with paraphernalia, the school, which is like a Juuling device or an e-cigarette, the school could decide to impose discipline. Now, the misuse of Juuls to smoke marijuana is really where schools are becoming concerned. So let's talk a bit about the marijuana laws. I ask kids, and I see some kids in the room, so I'm going to pick on you guys, and I'm sorry to do it, but I want to ask you the question, how many of you think marijuana is legal? Okay, 2 of the 3. We have one that didn't raise your hand. Why didn't you raise your hand? You can come practice with me. The answer was marijuana is not legal for kids. It's legal if you are over the age of 21. Very good answer. You can possess up to 1 ounce of THC if you are over the age of 21. So THC now, some people are starting, I see perhaps somebody in the medical field in the room. THC can be some derivative of marijuana. So what we're seeing a lot is CBD oil. We're seeing edibles. It isn't just that you have to smoke marijuana anymore. Okay, so back to the law. 21 and over can possess up to 1 ounce. Kids who are between the ages of 18 and 21 can apply for a medical marijuana card. But if you're under the age of 18, you are not legally in possession of marijuana for any reason. So under 21, you could be charged with a misdemeanor offense, a felony offense for the possession of marijuana. Now, just in terms of definitions, marijuana is a misdemeanor if you possess more than 1 ounce and up to 4 ounces. And that applies both to the marijuana you smoke as well as edibles. If you have more than 4 ounces, it's a felony offense. One of the things we're seeing, and my practice sees a lot, is the problem with edibles, marijuana edibles, is that kids don't understand that unlike smoking it, your body doesn't metabolize those edibles as quickly. Those edibles oftentimes look like gummy bears, they look like chocolate bars, and kids will be at a party and they'll eat, 1 or 2 and think, well, this isn't doing anything. And so they eat a handful of gummy bears, and we find so frequently these kids are being admitted into the emergency room for an overdose on marijuana simply because it hits them all at once, and I know Justin Luke Riley is going to talk a bit more about that. So I want to get into, now that I've defined the law for you, I want to talk just a bit about schools and what schools can do if your child is caught with marijuana. So I talk to kids all the time about what does the law say about when schools can search your locker or search your backpack? What is the school's authority to do that if your child is found with a Juuling device and they think that there's something going on that they need to investigate? So when we talk about police and law enforcement, they are required, and you've all heard of the 4th Amendment and the 5th Amendment, they cannot execute a search or a seizure without a warrant. So for example, if your kid is growing marijuana in the basement, police, if they believe that were going on, would have to have a warrant to come in and search it. But school officials are not subject to the same rules. They have their own code of conduct and their own safety considerations, and they are not using it for a legal purpose, the search or the seizure, and so they are permitted to search your kid's backpack, to ask them to show the marijuana, and to ask them questions about what are you doing. Now, where that's different from law enforcement is that if law enforcement contacts your child, they can't start questioning your child under the age of 18 without a parent present. School officials can. And so what we are seeing so often is that kids get called into the dean's office or the principal's office, and they are being asked, well, that kind of looks like a flash drive. Is it a Juul? And the kid says, and the school administrator says, listen, you're going to get in less trouble if you're just honest with us and tell us what it is, as opposed to making me figure it out and guessing. And so oftentimes kids will give full statements to school administration. They can turn over the device, and they will often be asked to turn over the device. What's the problem? In a nutshell, most high schools, East included, have school resource officers. Those school resource officers, or SROs as they are called, are part of your local law enforcement community. And when your child goes in and gives a statement to a school official about what they may be in possession of, that statement may be picked up by a school resource officer and give rise to a criminal case against your kid. So what does that mean? Parents ask me all the time. It is so hard, right? We tell our kids, be honest, tell the truth, take responsibility for the things that you've done. They also have constitutional rights, your kids, just like you do. And this presentation and the presentations I give are never a suggestion that you should obstruct law enforcement, but you also have the right to ask for your parent or ask for a lawyer. And if your kid is called into the office, if your child gives a statement, that may well be used against him to make a case. So how do I see these cases come up? Almost always kids, and for these kids in the room who use technology more than most of us breathe, when you are communicating with your friends, things like Snapchat and text messages, those are preserved from now till the end of time. So I have so many cases where kids think, well, Snapchat messages just delete from the phone. Nobody's going to ever be able to see that I am doing my drug deal via Snapchat. The reality is they can be recovered, and they are often recovered. And for a lawyer like me, when those statements are in black and white, and when a law enforcement officer decides they want to get to that information, it makes it pretty difficult to defend the case where the kid is accused of being in possession of drugs. Now, where the school is concerned, your child doesn't have any real right to privacy. And you should check, and I didn't do it before I came, but you should check the Denver Public Schools Code of Conduct and educate yourself about what might happen if your kid were to be caught with any sort of drug, including vaping devices or Juuls, because they will adhere to their policies, and oftentimes that does not include due process for your kid. Unlike in the criminal justice system, where there would be a full opportunity to be heard and to present a defense, oftentimes schools have recovered it from you, they make a presumption, and they impose discipline before a parent can even get in the way. And some of the most, not in the way, but get involved. And some of the most tragic cases I've seen are exactly that. The kid walks in, talks to a school administrator, that turns into a misdemeanor filing. I've had kids who have had misdemeanor cases or school discipline that have not been admitted to college simply as a result of the possession of marijuana, the criminal conviction that could come with it, even as a juvenile. And I've had kids denied financial aid because as a juvenile, you have to disclose. Applications have gotten smart. It used to be the question was, well, have you ever been convicted of felony? Right? And most people who are, applying for a lot of these things haven't. Now applications ask, have you ever pled guilty? Have you ever been subject to discipline in any setting, academic or otherwise, as the result of use of drugs or any other criminal activity? And so we are seeing now even the most minor of infractions, minors in possession, being caught with a vaping device, being caught with marijuana, is keeping kids from getting into schools. Can schools search your kid's locker? They can. And they may, if they think your kid has something in the locker that is unlawful. Can they do drug testing? They can. They can make that part of a safety plan if your child were to get into trouble. They can make it a criteria for doing extracurricular activities, particularly where the school has a concern about a growing drug problem. I will tell you one of the things that I see quite frequently, how do these things come up? Sometimes kids are caught red-handed. Much of the time, what I see in my practice is a safe to tell tip. Are you all familiar with your safe to tell hotline? Most of you are. it's a good thing and a scary thing all at once. It is intended to be a mechanism to advise the school of things your kids are doing that they shouldn't be doing. The problem becomes it gets manipulated, and kids will call it and do it to get somebody else in trouble, whether or not it's real. And the school then has to investigate it and can contact your child and start asking them questions. The last thing I wanted to talk about, and I don't know how, do I have? Okay, I'm good. The last thing I wanted to talk about is some of the prevalence that we see with parents who have these devices or edibles or marijuana. It's legal for us now up to an ounce, and I see a lot of parents who think it's in their medicine cabinet or locked away, and kids end up getting a hold of it and bringing it to school and selling it or dispensing it. When that happens, we're no longer talking about either a petty offense or a misdemeanor offense. We could be talking about a felony offense for the distribution of unlawful drugs. And that is most certainly something that will follow your kid for a very long time if they are charged with a felony. The last criminal piece I wanted to talk about to parents is contributing to the delinquency of a minor. I get asked this question all of the time, and homecoming is coming up. What happens if parents know that their kid is using it, whether it be alcohol or marijuana, and they're doing it in their home, but the parents in some fashion have sanctioned it in their home? And I tell this story in every one of these presentations I give because I think it brings home the example. And it involves alcohol, but the same would be true for marijuana. Probably about 6 years ago, I had a woman in my practice who had kids in high school. It was prom time, and they all wanted to drink. And just like I did when I was a kid, right? Come on, Mom, just let my friends come over. All the kids knew where the cool house was, right? So that mom decided, all right, I know my kids are going to be drinking. So if that's going to happen, let me just make sure they're safe. And she allowed the kids to come to her house. In that case, she purchased the alcohol for the kids. And she had about 35 kids over to her house. She purchased the kegs for the party, thinking to herself, I imagine with the best of intentions that if I know where they are, I'll be able to keep them safe. She took their car keys one by one as they walked in the door, and you can imagine what happened. She went to sleep at about 2 a.m., and a couple of the kids got the car keys, took them, and they were one of these terrible, tragic accidents that you hear about on the news. What happened? My client was charged with not one, but 35 felony counts of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. It is a class 4 felony, and it essentially says, I won't bore you with the language of the statute, but that charge essentially says that if you in some way facilitate or aid a minor in the commission of a crime, you could be, as a parent, or an adult responsible for the kid, held criminally liable for it. And so with 35 counts, and with kids this is generally true, whether we're talking about marijuana or other drugs or alcohol, law enforcement is really pretty good at unraveling this web and where did it come from and who provided it. And lo and behold, all of the kids started pointing fingers. They figured out pretty quickly what my client had done. And because she was charged with 35 counts and a class 4 felony for contributing to the delinquency of a minor carries with it 2 to 6 years in the Department of Corrections for each count, she ended up going to prison for a very long time, because a judge felt like he needed to make an example of her, and there was not much we could do once the kids started talking. I will tell you as a side note, they were also sued civilly for the tragic accident that occurred. So the substance of this conversation is very limited to marijuana and vaping, but I tell you that story because so many of us now think that marijuana is legal. Marijuana is legal for us, But if your children are using it and you have some sense that they are using it, or you see that they've got these Juuling devices and could perhaps be using it, you are all parents. I am here to be a lawyer, not a parent, but the point is to educate you so that you are smart about what does the law say, how to identify some of these devices, and what do I do if my kid gets in trouble. And the thing I will leave you with is that if your child finds themselves in trouble, the first thing you should do is contact a lawyer. Don't presume that, well, this is going to be no big deal, we'll figure it out, we'll be able to talk to the school officials or law enforcement, and they'll get it because this is just kids stuff. I have a full-time practice because parents think that if they just, figure that out or explain it away, it's not going to become something bigger, and it almost always does. So I think I'm close to out of time. I will end it there.